the glittering halls of Greystone Manor, a lavish banquet turns deadly when Lord Ashburn collapses, poisoned by a silver chalice laced with cyanide. Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective, steps into a web of lies and secrets. A vengeful noblewoman, a cunning diplomat, and a terrified servant each hides a piece of the truth. As motives unravel and alibis crumble, Poirot's little grey cells uncover a chilling conspiracy. Who wielded the poison and why? In just 30 seconds, dive into a tale of betrayal, revenge, and murder that will keep you guessing until the final revelation. Chapter 1. The Grand Banquet. The autumn evening draped Greystone Manor in a velvet hush, broken only by the clatter of carriage wheels on the gravel drive and the soft hum of anticipation from the guests assembling within. The manor, a sprawling edifice of weathered stone and ivy, stood as a testament to the Ashburn family's enduring wealth, its windows ablaze with the golden glow of 100 candles. Tonight, Lord Reginald Ashburn, a man whose robust frame and commanding presence belied his 50 years, hosted his annual banquet, a tradition that drew the elite of England's countryside like moths to a flame. Among them was Hercule Poirot, the celebrated Belgian detective, whose diminutive stature and meticulously groomed moustache contrasted sharply with the grandeur of his reputation. Poirot, seated near the head of the long mahogany table, adjusted his immaculate cuffs and surveyed the dining hall with eyes that missed nothing. The room was a symphony of opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across damask tablecloths. Silver cutlery gleamed under the flicker of candelabras, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted pheasant and aged wine. 30 guests, resplendent in evening dress, filled the hall with murmured pleasantries, their laughter a brittle veneer over rivalries and ambitions. To Poirot's left sat Captain Arthur Hastings, his loyal friend, whose ruddy cheeks betrayed his delight in the evening's splendour. "Quite a show, a Poirot," Hastings whispered, nodding toward the glittering assembly. Poirot's lips twitched in a faint smile. "A show, mon ami, where every player wears a mask." Lord Ashburn rose, his broad shoulders filling the tailored lines of his dinner jacket, and lifted a silver chalice, its surface encrusted with emeralds that caught the light like green fire. This heirloom, passed down through generations, was the centerpiece of the evening, a symbol of the Ashburn legacy. "My friends," he boomed, his voice rich with authority, "we gather to celebrate prosperity and the bonds that unite us. To alliance." The guests raised their glasses, a chorus of crystal clinking in agreement. Poirot, ever observant, noted the fleeting glances exchanged among the crowd, a tightening of lips here, a raised eyebrow there. He sipped his wine, his mind already cataloguing the undercurrents of discord. No sooner had Lord Ashburn drained his chalice than his face contorted. A gasp escaped him, his hand flew to his throat, and he staggered, the chalice clattering to the floor. The room fell silent, the gaiety snuffed out like a candle. Lady Beatrice Langley, a striking woman with raven hair and a gown of crimson silk, leapt to her feet, her voice sharp. "Reginald, what is it?" But Lord Ashburn crumpled to the ground, his eyes wide with shock, his breath a ragged wheeze. Dr. Theodore Hargreaves, a lean man with a physician's practiced calm, rushed to his side, loosening his collar and pressing fingers to his pulse. After a tense moment, Hargreaves looked up, his face grim. "He's dead." A murmur of horror rippled through the guests. Poirot, already on his feet, moved with a quiet grace to the fallen lord's side. His gaze fixed on the chalice, now lying on its side, a faint residue of wine pooling beneath it. "Monsieur," he said softly to Hargreaves, "what is your opinion?" The doctor's brow furrowed. "Poison, I suspect. The symptoms convulsions, cyanosis are consistent with cyanide. But we must test the chalice." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Cyanide was swift, merciless, and deliberate. This was no accident. Hastings, pale but resolute, joined Poirot. "Good heavens, who could have done this?" he muttered. Poirot's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, swept the room, lingering on three figures. Lady Beatrice, whose rivalry with Ashburn was the talk of the county. Thomas Wren, a young servant hovering near the sideboard, his hands twisting nervously, and Sir Charles Vane, a suave diplomat whose charm masked a reputation for ruthless cunning. Someone, Poirot said, his voice low and precise, who knew the chalice was Lord Ashburn's alone. This, mon ami, is a crime of calculation. As the guests whispered and the servants stood frozen, Poirot's little grey cells began their silent work, unravelling the first threads of a deadly tapestry. Chapter 2. The scene of the crime, the dining hall of Greystone Manor. So recently, a stage 4 conviviality had transformed into a tableau of dread. The air, once fragrant with the aromas of roasted pheasant and fine claret, now carried a faint, metallic tang, an unsettling reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. The guests, their faces a gallery of shock and suspicion, stood in uneasy clusters, their voices hushed as if fearful of disturbing the spectre of death. Lord Reginald Ashburn's body lay where it had fallen, covered now with a white cloth, requisitioned from the servants' linens, his imposing presence reduced to a silent, shrouded form. The emerald-encrusted chalice, the instrument of his demise, rested on the polished mahogany table, its silver surface gleaming mockingly under the chandelier's light. Hercule Poirot, his compact frame a study in composure, stood beside the table, his keen eyes darting from the chalice to the guests and back again. His mustache, impeccably groomed, quivered slightly as he absorbed every detail of the scene. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the faithful companion, hovered at his side, his honest face creased with concern. "It's ghastly, Poirot," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the murmur of the crowd. "To think one of these people, someone we dined with, could be a murderer." Poirot's lips curved in a faint, enigmatic smile. "Oui, mon ami, but the murderer is not merely one who kills. He is one who plans, who watches, who waits. And we, Hastings, shall find him by observing what he has left behind." Inspector Japp, summoned urgently from Scotland Yard, arrived, with a brisk efficiency that contrasted with the Manor's lingering opulence. His weathered face, accustomed to the grim realities of crime, betrayed a flicker of unease as he surveyed the scene. "Nasty business, this," he said, nodding to Poirot. "Cyanide, Dr. Hargreaves reckons, and I'd wager he's right." "Stuff, but how the devil did it get into that chalice?" Poirot inclined his head, his eyes fixed on the chalice. "That, Inspector, is the question. And the answer lies not only in the how, but in the who and the why." Poirot knelt beside the chalice, careful not to touch it, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. The vessel was a work of art, its silver surface etched with intricate patterns, the emeralds catching the light in a way that seemed almost defiant. He noted the absence of fingerprints, save for a faint smudge that Dr. Hargreaves confirmed belonged to Lord Ashburn himself. "No other marks," Poirot murmured, his voice a low hum of concentration. The poisoner was meticulous, or the chalice was wiped clean. He rose, his gaze sweeping the room, cataloguing the positions of the guests and servants during the fatal toast. The dining hall was a long rectangular space, its walls adorned with portraits of Ashburn ancestors, their stern gazes seeming to judge the living. The table, set for 30, stretched nearly the length of the room, flanked by her backed chairs, upholstered in crimson velvet. At the head, where Lord Ashburn had sat, the chalice had been placed directly before him, a privilege reserved for the host. To his right had been Lady Beatrice Langley, her crimson gown a vivid contrast to the sombre mood. To his left, Sir Charles Vane, whose polished demeanour had not faltered even in the face of death. Thomas Wren, the young servant, had been stationed near a sideboard along the eastern wall, where decanters of wine and trays of crystal glasses awaited. Poirot's mind, a machine of precision, reconstructed the evening sequence. The guests had mingled in the drawing-room for an hour before dinner, a period of laughter and veiled barbs, during which the chalice had sat unattended on the table, polished and ready for the toast. Thomas Wren had filled it with wine from a decanter shared by all, a fact confirmed by the other guests' untainted glasses. The toast had followed the first course, a moment of ceremony that had drawn every eye to Lord Ashburn. The poison, Poirot said to Japp, was introduced between the filling of the chalice and the moment it touched his lips. A narrow window, but sufficient for one who is bold and cunning. Japp scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing. Bold. Aye, but risky. With all these people about, someone must have seen something. Poirot's smile was almost imperceptible. People see, Inspector, but they do not always observe, and it is in the observation that we find the truth. He requested a diagram of the dining hall, which a footman hastily provided, and began to mark the positions of the guests and servants. Lady Beatrice had been seen near the table during the mingling, ostensibly admiring the silverware. Sir Charles had lingered near a portrait, though his proximity to the chalice was undeniable. Thomas Wren had moved between the sideboard and the kitchen, his duties keeping him in constant motion. Poirot turned his attention to the guests, who had been shepherded into the adjacent drawing-room to await questioning. The room was a study in contrasts. Velvet drapes and gilded mirrors clashed with the pale faces and nervous gestures of those within. Lady Beatrice stood apart, her posture rigid, her dark eyes scanning the room as if daring anyone to meet her gaze. Sir Charles, by contrast, leaned against a mantelpiece, his smile a mask of nonchalance, though Poirot noted the slight tremor in his hand as he sipped a brandy. Thomas Wren, relegated to a corner with the other servants, twisted a cloth in his hands, his youthful face etched with fear. Approaching Lady Beatrice, Poirot bowed slightly, his manner courteous but probing. "Madame, you were close to Lord Ashburn this evening. Perhaps you noticed something unusual." Her lips thinned, and she drew herself up, her voice cold. "I noticed nothing but his insufferable arrogance. If you seek a murderer, Monsieur Poirot, look to those who envied his wealth." Her words were sharp, but Poirot detected a flicker of unease in her eyes, a crack in her formidable facade. He made a mental note. Lady Beatrice's feud with Ashburn was no secret, but her composure suggested either innocence or a masterful deceit. Sir Charles was next, his charm as polished as the chalice itself. "A dreadful affair," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I was merely a guest, Monsieur Poirot, enjoying the hospitality. I saw nothing amiss." Yet his eyes, when they met Poirot's, held a guarded quality, as if weighing every word. Poirot pressed gently, inquiring about his movements during the mingling. "I admired a portrait of old Lord Ashburn," Sir Charles replied, gesturing vaguely toward the dining hall. "A fine likeness." Poirot nodded, filing away the lack of corroboration for this alibi. Thomas Wren proved the most nervous of the three, his voice trembling as he recounted his duties. "I filled the chalice, sir, just as I was told," he said, his eyes darting to the floor. "From the decanter, same as the others. I didn't touch it after." Poirot's questions were kind but relentless, probing the boy's routine, his access to the chalice, and his interactions with the guests. Thomas admitted to stepping away briefly to fetch more wine, a moment when the chalice had been left unguarded. A moment, Poirot mused to Hastings, is all a poisoner needs. The physical evidence offered little clarity. Dr. Hargreaves, working with a local chemist summoned to the manor, confirmed the presence of cyanide in the chalice's residue, but the decanter and other glasses were clean. The poison was in the chalice alone, Hargreaves said, his voice heavy. Someone knew it was his. Poirot examined the sideboard, noting the orderly arrangement of glasses and the absence of any spilled wine that might suggest tampering. The servants, questioned separately, recalled no strangers near the table, but their attention had been divided by the demands of the evening as the night wore on. Poirot retreated to a quiet corner of the drawing-room, his mind a whirl of facts and impressions. The chalice, a unique and conspicuous target, suggested a personal vendetta. Lady Beatrice's animosity was well known. Her family's claim to a neighbouring estate a source of bitter dispute with Ashburn. Sir Charles, with his diplomatic connections and rumoured financial troubles, might have harboured a grudge obscured by his charm. Thomas Wren, though seemingly a minor player, could have been coerced or tempted, his poverty a lever for manipulation. Hastings, pacing nearby, broke into Poirot's thoughts. "It's like a needle in a haystack, Poirot. So many people, so many chances to slip something into that chalice." Poirot's eyes twinkled, a sign of his mind at work. "Nan, mon ami, the haystack is large, but the needle is sharp. We must look for the hand that held it." He requested a guest list, cross-referenced with their positions during the mingling, and began to sketch a timeline in his notebook, each entry a step toward the truth. The manor's clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent halls. The guests, weary and anxious, were permitted to retire to their rooms under Japp's watchful eye, but Poirot remained, his gaze returning to the dining hall. The chalice, now sealed in a police bag, seemed to mock him with its secrets. "You have seen the murderer," he whispered to himself, "and you will tell me who it is." With a final glance at the shrouded form of Lord Ashburn, Poirot turned to Hastings. "Tomorrow we shall peel back the layers of this crime. The little grey cells, they are already at work." As the manor settled into an uneasy sleep, Poirot's mind did not rest. The scene of the crime was a puzzle, its pieces scattered among the guests, the servants, and the silent walls of Greystone Manor. Somewhere, in the interplay of motive, opportunity, and deceit, lay the truth, and Hercule Poirot would not rest until he had found it. Chapter 3. The rivals grudged the morning after Lord Reginald Ashburn's death dawned grey and heavy. The sky over Greystone Manor cloaked in clouds that mirrored the unease within its walls. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed despite the early hour, sat in the manor's library, a sanctuary of leather-bound volumes and polished oak. The room, with its tall windows and faint scent of old paper, offered a quiet reprieve from the clamour of suspicion that had gripped the household. Poirot's fingers tapped lightly on the arm of a wing-back chair, his eyes fixed on a distant point as his mind sifted through the events of the previous night. Captain Hastings, ever eager, stood by the fireplace, warming his hands against the autumn chill. "It's a grim business, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "Lady Beatrice Langley, she's the one to watch. Mark my words. That feud with Ashburn was no secret." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of amusement or agreement. It was hard to tell. "The feud, mon ami, is indeed a thread in this tapestry, but we must not pull it too quickly, lest we unravel the wrong pattern." He had requested Lady Beatrice's presence, and as the library door opened, she entered with the bearing of a queen, her crimson shawl a vivid contrast to the muted tones of the room. Her dark hair was swept up in a severe chignon, and her eyes, sharp as cut glass, met Poirot's without flinching. She was a woman of 40, her beauty tempered by a hardness that spoke of battles fought and won though not. "Perhaps the one with Lord Ashburn," Madame Poirot began, rising with a courteous bow. "I thank you for joining me. The matter of Lord Ashburn's death requires the clarity only you can provide." Lady Beatrice seated herself with deliberate grace, her posture rigid. "Clarity, Monsieur Poirot, I have none to offer. Reginald was a boor and a thief, but I did not kill him." Her voice was steady, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of her gloved hands, a telltale sign of tension beneath her composure. He leaned forward, his tone gentle but probing. "The dispute between you and Lord Ashburn is well known. The estate of Willowmere, is it not? A matter of inheritance, contested for years." Lady Beatrice's lips thinned, and she nodded curtly. "Willowmere was my father's, rightfully. Mine, Reginald used his influence to claim it, bribing lawyers and twisting the law to his favour. He gloated over it, Monsieur Poirot, as if my loss were his trophy." Her words carried a venom that filled the room, and Hastings, shifting uncomfortably, shot Poirot a glance that said, "See, motive enough." Poirot's eyes, however, remained fixed on Lady Beatrice. "And yet, Madame, you say you did not stoop to murder. Where were you, precisely, during the hour before dinner, when the chalice stood unattended?" Her gaze faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker Poirot did not miss. "I was in the conservatory," she replied, her voice firm. "I needed air, away from the sycophants fawning over Reginald. I returned just before we were seated." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you saw no one near the chalice, no one acting, perhaps, out of the ordinary?" Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "I was not in the dining hall, Monsieur Poirot. I cannot speak to what others did." Her tone was defiant, but Poirot detected a subtle tremor, a hint of something withheld. He pressed further, his voice soft as velvet. "Madame, a woman of your perception notices much, even from a distance. A glance, a gesture, something. Perhaps that seemed insignificant at the time." She hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing. I saw nothing." But her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, betrayed her words. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Mercy, Madame, you have been most helpful." Lady Beatrice rose, her shawl rustling like leaves, and departed with a nod. Her dignity intact, but her composure frayed at the edges. Hastings waited until the door closed before turning to Poirot. "She's hiding something, isn't she? That business about the conservatory, it doesn't add up. Why go there alone when the party was in full swing?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic, because Mon ami, the conservatory, offers solitude and an alibi, but we shall see if her story holds. He had already learned, through a discreet conversation with a maid, that Lady Beatrice had been seen near the dining hall during the mingling, her crimson gown unmistakable as she lingered by the sideboard. The maid, a timid girl named Elsie, had thought nothing of it, assuming Lady Beatrice was admiring the table settings. Admiring, perhaps, Poirot murmured to himself, or ensuring a moment of opportunity. He rose and paced the library, his steps measured, his mind a whirl of connections. Lady Beatrice's grudge was no mere rumour. It was a wound festering for years, fueled by legal battles and public humiliation. Willowmere, a fertile estate bordering Ashburn's lands, had been the subject of a bitter lawsuit. Its ownership granted to Ashburn through what many whispered was dubious means. Lady Beatrice, widowed and childless, had staked her pride on reclaiming it, only to face defeat in the courts. Such a loss, Poirot knew, could drive a woman of her temperament to desperate measures. Yet her denial of murder rang with a curious conviction. "She is proud," Poirot said to Hastings, "and pride does not easily bend to poison. It is too subtle, too clandestine for one who speaks of facing her enemy openly." Hastings frowned. But if not her, then who? She had the motive, and she was near the chalice. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Motive, oui, but opportunity is shared by many. And pride, Hastings, can be a mask for other sins. He turned to the window, where the grey light filtered through, casting shadows on the bookshelves. The library's silence was a canvas for his thoughts, each detail of the previous night arranging itself in his mind like pieces on a chessboard. Lady Beatrice's presence near the dining hall suggested intent, but the act of poisoning required more than motive. It required access, timing, and nerve. The chalice, polished and prominent, had been a beacon for the poisoner, but its exposure during the mingling meant anyone could have approached it. Lady Beatrice's story, though flawed, did not yet mark her as the hand that delivered death. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Japp. His face flushed from the morning's inquiries. "I've spoken to the staff," Japp said, settling into a chair with a grunt. "No one saw anything odd, but that Ren Boitemas is jumpy as a cat. Keeps insisting he only poured the wine, but he's hiding something. I'd bet my badge on it." Poirot nodded, his mind already turning to the young servant. "And Sir Charles Vane?" he asked. Japp shrugged, smooth as ever. "Says he was. Nowhere near the chalice, but I don't trust that smile of his. Too polished, if you ask me." Polished, Poirot agreed, but polish can conceal a tarnished heart. He made a note to question both Thomas and Sir Charles further, their roles in the evening's drama still unclear. Lady Beatrice, however, remained a focal point, her grudge a blazing signpost in the fog of suspicion. "We must verify her movements," Poirot said, "and seek the truth behind her words. The conservatory, the dining hall, these are not mere places, but stages for deception." As the morning wore on, Poirot requested Elsie, the maid, to confirm her sighting of Lady Beatrice. The girl, nervous but earnest, repeated her story. Lady Beatrice had been near the sideboard, her hand resting briefly on the table where the chalice stood. "She didn't touch it, sir," Elsie said, her voice trembling. "At least, I don't think so. It was so busy, with everyone milling about." Poirot thanked her, his mind noting the ambiguity. A hand on the table was not a hand on the chalice, but proximity was a step toward opportunity. He returned to the library, where Hastings awaited, his impatience palpable. "What now, Poirot? Are we to chase every guest's story?" Poirot's smile was serene. "Not chase, mon ami, but sift. The truth is like sand through a sieve only. The finest grains remain." He opened his notebook, sketching a timeline of the mingling hour, marking Lady Beatrice's claimed absence against Elsie's testimony. The discrepancy was small but significant. A crack in the facade of her alibi. The library clock chimed 10, its notes a reminder of time's relentless march. Poirot closed his notebook, his resolve firm. Lady Beatrice's grudge was a beacon, but the path to the murderer was paved with subtler clues, gestures, glances, and the silent language of guilt. "We shall speak to the others," he told Hastings, "and let the little grey cells weave their magic. The rival's grudge is but one thread, and the tapestry of this crime is far from complete." Chapter 4. The Servant's Tale. The servants' quarters of Greystone Manor, tucked beneath the grand staircases and opulent halls, were a world apart from the splendour above. Narrow corridors, dimly lit by flickering gas lamps, led to a small, common room where the staff gathered in moments of respite. The air here was heavy with the scent of damp stone and carbolic soap, a stark contrast to the perfumed elegance of the dining hall. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the worn floorboards, entered this domain with a quiet authority, his presence as incongruous as a peacock in a henhouse. Captain Hastings followed, his broad shoulders hunched slightly. In the low-ceilinged space, his expression a mix of curiosity and unease. "Not exactly the Ritz, is it, Poirot?" he muttered, glancing at the plain wooden benches and chipped teapot on a rickety table. "Nan, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes scanning the room with their usual acuity, "but truth, it hides as easily in shadows as in chandeliers." He had come to speak with Thomas Wren, the young servant whose nervous demeanour at the banquet had caught his attention. Thomas, barely 20, was a wiry figure with a shock of sandy hair and eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. He stood by the far wall, twisting a cloth in his hands, his face pale as the linen he held. The other servants had been dismissed, leaving the room empty save for Poirot, Hastings, and the trembling lad. "Monsieur Wren," Poirot began, his voice gentle yet precise, like a surgeon's scalpel, "you are, I understand, the one who filled Lord Ashburn's chalice last evening. A task of great responsibility, n'est-ce pas?" Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I poured the wine, same as always. From the decanter, sir, like I was told." His words tumbled out, too quick, too eager, and Poirot's moustache twitched as he noted the boy's anxiety. Poirot seated himself on a bench, gesturing for Thomas to do the same. The lad perched on the edge, as if ready to bolt. "Tell me, Thomas," Poirot continued, his tone soothing but insistent, "the sequence of your duties. From the moment the guests arrived to the toast that ended so tragically." Thomas's hands tightened on the cloth, his knuckles whitening. "I was in the dining hall, sir, setting out glasses. Then I went to the kitchen to fetch the wine. I filled the chalice just before the first course from the same decanter as the others. I swear it, sir, I did nothing wrong." Poirot's eyes, sharp as a hawk's, studied the boy's face. The sincerity was there, but so was fear that went beyond the shock of a master's death. "And after you filled the chalice," Poirot pressed, "what then?" "You remained at the sideboard." Thomas hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Mostly, sir. I I stepped away for a moment to get more napkins from the pantry, but it was only a minute, I swear. Poirot's fingers steepled, a sign of his mind at work. A minute, Thomas, can be an eternity in the hands of a murderer. Hastings, standing by the door, shifted uncomfortably. "Sounds like the boy left the chalice unguarded," he said, his voice low but audible. "Plenty of time for someone to slip something in." Poirot nodded, but his attention remained on Thomas. Who else was near the sideboard? Mon Garcon. A guest, perhaps, or another servant. Thomas's eyes flickered, and he shook his head. "It was so busy, sir. People were everywhere, talking, moving about. I didn't see anyone touch the chalice, I swear it." Poirot leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "Thomas, you are young, and life, it is not always kind to those in service. You have a mother, I hear she is unwell, and debts, they weigh heavy on a young man's shoulders." Thomas's face flushed, his eyes widening with panic. "How did you?" "I mean, yes, sir, she's sick, but I'd never do anything to hurt his lordship. I needed this job." His voice cracked, and Poirot's expression softened, though his gaze remained piercing. "Calm yourself, Thomas," Poirot said, raising a hand. "I do not accuse you, but a man in need is a man who can be tempted. Tell me, did anyone speak to you before the banquet? Offer you money, perhaps, or make a strange request?" Thomas shook his head vehemently, but the cloth in his hands was now a twisted knot. "No, sir, nothing like that. I just did my job." Yet the tremor in his voice, the way his eyes avoided Poirot's, spoke of something unspoken. Poirot rose, pacing the small room with measured steps, his mind a whirl of possibilities. Thomas Wren was no mastermind, that much was clear. His fear was genuine, his denials heartfelt, but there was a shadow behind his words, a secret he guarded out of loyalty or terror. Poirot's thoughts turned to the other suspects, Lady Beatrice, with her burning grudge, and Sir Charles Vane, whose charm concealed a darker edge. Could Thomas have been a pawn in their game, unwitting or coerced? The chalice, left unattended, for that fleeting minute, offered a window for mischief. But the poison's precision suggested a plan more intricate than a servant's impulse. He paused by the window, where a sliver of grey light pierced the gloom. "Thomas," he said, turning back to the boy, "you were certain no one approached you. No one asked you to step away, to fetch something, to turn your eyes elsewhere." Thomas's face crumpled, and for a moment Poirot thought he might break. But the lad straightened, his jaw set. "No, sir, I just did my job." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Very well, you may go, but we shall speak again." As Thomas scurried from the room, Hastings let out a low whistle. "He's scared out of his wits, Poirot. Think he's in on it." Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. "In on it, perhaps, but not the architect. He is a tool, Hastings, not the hand that wields it. His fear is not that of a guilty man, but of one who knows more than he dares say." He opened his notebook, jotting down the details of Thomas's account, circling the moment of his absence. From the sideboard, that minute, so casually dismissed, was a chink in the armour of the evening's timeline. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Japp, his coat dusted with the morning's mist. "Had a word with the butler," Japp said, settling onto a bench with a grunt. "Confirms Thomas was in and out of the kitchen all evening, fetching this and that. Says the boy's honest, but skittish. Always has been." Poirot's eyes gleamed, Skittish we, but skittish men do not always lie. They hide. We must discover what Orhotamus hides. Japp raised an eyebrow. You think someone put him up to something? Lady Beatrice, maybe. She's got the money to throw around. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Money, Inspector, is a universal key, but it requires a lock to open. Thomas's debts, his mother's illness, these are locks that someone may have turned. He closed his notebook with a snap, his resolve firm. We shall observe Thomas, and we shall watch those who watch him. The servant's tale is but a chapter, and the book of this crime has many pages yet to turn. The common room fell silent as Japp departed to continue his inquiries, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone. The detective's gaze lingered on the door through which Thomas had fled, his mind tracing the threads of the boy's story. A servant, poor and desperate, was an easy mark for manipulation. But the cyanide's precision required a mind colder than Thomas's trembling heart could muster. The poisoner, Poirot murmured, is one who plans, who calculates. Thomas is a piece on the board, but not the player. Hastings, ever practical, rubbed his hands together. What's next, then? Back to Lady Beatrice, or that vain fellow? He's slippery as an eel. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Both, mon ami, and neither. We shall let them move, let them betray themselves. The little grey cells, they see the pattern, and soon the pattern will reveal the hand that wove it. He adjusted his cuffs, his composure unshaken, and led the way back to the manor's upper halls, where the shadows of suspicion grew longer with each passing hour. Chapter 5. The mysterious guest, the drawing-room of Greystone Manor, with its heavy velvet drapes and flickering firelight, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot entered, his polished shoes silent on the thick Persian rug. The afternoon had deepened the gloom outside, casting long shadows across the room's gilded mirrors and polished furniture. The guests, confined to the manor under Inspector Japp's orders, moved restlessly, their conversations a low hum punctuated by nervous glances. Poirot, his compact figure radiating quiet authority, had chosen this moment to engage Sir Charles Vane, the enigmatic diplomat whose charm had not wavered even in the face of murder. Captain Hastings, trailing behind, whispered, "He's a cool customer, Poirot. Not a hair out of place, despite all this." "Oui, mon ami Poirot," replied, his eyes glinting like polished obsidian. But the coolest surface often hides the fiercest currents. He approached Sir Charles, who lounged by a marble mantelpiece, a glass of brandy in hand, his tailored evening suit as pristine as if the previous night's horror had never occurred. The man was in his late 30s, with a lean, handsome face, and eyes that sparkled with a knowing amusement. "Monsieur Vane," Poirot began, his voice smooth as silk, "a word, if you please. The matter of Lord Ashburn's death weighs heavily, and your insight, it may illuminate the shadows, sir." Charles's smile was a masterpiece of nonchalance. "Of course, Monsieur, I'm at your service, though I fear I've little to offer. A dreadful business, but I was merely a guest, enjoying the evening." His tone was light, almost playful, but Poirot's gaze was unrelenting, noting the slight tightening of the man's fingers around his glass. "Merely a guest, perhaps," Poirot said, seating himself in a high-backed chair and gesturing for Sir Charles to join him, "but one with a reputation for seeing much and saying little. Tell me, where were you when the chalice was filled?" Sir Charles settled into a chair, crossing one leg over the other with practiced ease. "I was admiring a portrait in the dining hall," he said, his voice steady. One of Ashburn's ancestors, I believe, a stern old fellow with a ruffled collar. I was there for some time before we were called to table. Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his skepticism. A portrait, monsieur. A curious choice for a man of your worldly experience, when the room was alive with conversation. Sir Charles's smile widened, but his eyes grew guarded. I appreciate art, Monsieur Poirot, and the banter of society can grow tiresome. Poirot leaned forward, his tone deceptively mild. And the chalice, you were near it, perhaps, during this appreciation of art. Sir Charles's laugh was soft, almost musical. Near it, I suppose I was, as were dozens of others. But I had no reason to tamper with it. I barely knew Ashburn. The words were smooth, but Poirot detected a faint edge, a crack in the diplomat's polished facade. He pressed further, his voice low and probing. Yet you toasted with enthusiasm, monsieur. I observed you myself, raising your glass with a vigor that suggested familiarity. Sir Charles's eyes flickered, a momentary lapse before his smile returned. A toast is a courtesy, Monsieur Poirot. I joined in the spirit of the evening. Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. And what of your past with Lord Ashburn? A man of your position, diplomatic circles, financial ventures, surely you crossed paths before. Sir Charles sipped his brandy, his movements deliberate. Our paths may have crossed, but not memorably. He was a man of business, I of diplomacy. Our worlds seldom aligned. Poirot's little grey cells were at work, piecing together fragments of information gathered from whispers among the guests and discreet inquiries by Inspector Japp. Sir Charles Vane, despite his charm, was rumoured to have suffered a financial setback in a venture tied to Ashburn's investments, a deal that had enriched the Lord while leaving others, including Vane, in ruin. The details were murky, but Poirot's instincts told him this was no coincidence. A man who loses a fortune, Poirot said, almost to himself, may harbour resentment, even if he smiles through it. Sir Charles's smile faltered, but only for an instant. You've been listening to gossip, Monsieur Poirot. I assure you, my finances are my own affair, and I bear no grudges. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Gossip, monsieur, is often the shadow of truth. And shadows, they reveal shapes that light conceals. He rose, bowing slightly. Merci for your time. We shall speak again. As Sir Charles returned to his brandy, Hastings joined Poirot by the window, where the grey light of the afternoon cast a pallor over the manicured lawns. He's slippery, Poirot, Hastings said, his voice low, all charm and no substance. Do you think he's our man? Poirot's gaze was distant, his mind a whirl of connections. He is a man of secrets, Hastings, and secrets are the currency of murder. But we must verify his story. The portrait, did anyone see him there? Poirot summoned a footman, a lanky youth named Peter, who had been stationed near the dining hall during the mingling. Peter, nervous under Poirot's scrutiny, shook his head. I didn't see Sir Charles by the portrait, sir. He was moving about, talking to folks, but I can't say where exactly. It was a right crush in there. Poirot thanked him, his mind noting the absence of corroboration. Sir Charles's alibi, like Lady Beatrice's, was a fragile thread, easily snapped by the weight of truth. Returning to the drawing-room, Poirot requested a quiet word with Inspector Japp, who was reviewing notes in a corner. I've had a look at Vane's luggage, Japp said, keeping his voice low. Nothing much, clothes, papers, a letter or two. One caught my eye, though. Coded, it looked like, mentioning a deal gone sour. Couldn't make head nor tail of it. Poirot's interest sharpened. A letter, you say? Show me, if you please. Japp produced a folded sheet, its contents a jumble of numbers and initials. Poirot studied it, his lips pursed. This is no mere letter, Inspector. It is a cipher, and ciphers, they guard secrets worth killing for. The letter, though cryptic, hinted at a financial dispute with initials that could plausibly stand for Ashburn. Poirot tucked it away for further study, his mind racing. Sir Charles's charm, his evasive answers, and now this letter all pointed to a man with more at stake than he admitted. Yet the act of poisoning required not just motive but opportunity, and Sir Charles's proximity to the chalice during the mingling was undeniable. Had he slipped the cyanide into the silver vessel while eyes were turned elsewhere? Or was he, like Thomas Wren, a piece in a larger game? Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by a commotion at the door. A maid, breathless, reported that Thomas Wren had been seen slipping into the garden, his manner furtive. He looked proper scared. Sir, she said, twisting her apron. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. The boy runs, perhaps, from what he knows, he said. We must keep watch on him, but for now, Sir Charles remains our focus. As the afternoon waned, Poirot retreated to a quiet alcove, his notebook open before him. He sketched a diagram of the dining hall, marking Sir Charles's claimed position by the portrait and his likely path to the chalice. The timeline was tight, but not impossible. A man of Vane's dexterity could have acted in a moment of distraction, perhaps when Thomas was called away. Yet the ciphered letter suggested a deeper plot, one that might intertwine with Lady Beatrice's grudge or Thomas's fear. Hastings, ever impatient, paced nearby. What's the next move, Poirot? We've got a nervous servant, a vengeful noblewoman, and now this slippery diplomat. It's a tangle. Poirot's smile was serene, his confidence unshaken. A tangle, oui, but every knot can be undone with care. Sir Charles Vane is a man of masks, and we shall unmask him. The mysterious guest has told us much, Hastings, but not all. The little grey cells, they will find the rest. The fire crackled in the drawing-room, its warmth a faint comfort against the chill of suspicion. Poirot closed his notebook, his resolve as firm as the Manor's ancient stones. Sir Charles Vane, with his charm and secrets, was a puzzle within a puzzle, and Poirot would not rest until every piece was in place. Chapter 6. The Mechanics of Murder. The late afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Greystone Manor's study, casting a muted glow over the oak-panelled walls and the heavy desk where Hercule Poirot sat, his notebook open before him. The room, with its shelves of leather-bound tomes and faint scent of pipe smoke, was a haven of order amidst the chaos of suspicion that gripped the household. Poirot's fingers, delicate yet precise, traced the lines of his meticulously drawn timeline, each mark a step in the deadly dance that had ended Lord Reginald Ashburn's life. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the grey sky, his brow furrowed with impatience. "It's a devil of a puzzle, Poirot," he said, turning to face the detective. "The chalice, the cyanide, how did it get there, with all those eyes about?" Poirot's moustache quivered, a sign of his mind's relentless activity. "The how, mon ami, is as important as the who. The mechanics of this murder are a machine, and we must dismantle it to find the hand that set it in motion." Beside him, Inspector Japp, his ties slightly askew from a morning of relentless inquiries, leaned over the desk, studying Poirot's notes. "You've got something there, Poirot," Japp said, his voice gruff but respectful. "A nasty bit of work, quick, clean, and no mistake. But getting it into that chalice without being seen, that's the trick." Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man who saw not just the crime but the pattern beneath it. "Precisement, Inspector. Let us reconstruct the machine." He rose, gesturing for Japp and Hastings to follow him to the dining hall, where the scene of the crime awaited, silent but eloquent in its clues. The hall, now empty of guests, seemed larger, its long mahogany table bare save for a few scattered candelabras. The spot where Lord Ashburn had fallen was marked by a faint stain on the polished floor, a grim reminder of the night's tragedy. The chalice, now in police custody, had left an invisible imprint, its absence as telling as its presence. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his compact frame dwarfed by the grandeur around him, yet commanding the space with his quiet authority. "Here," he said, pointing to the empty space where the chalice had rested, "is the heart of the crime." The chalice was Lord Ashburn's alone, a symbol of his status, known to all. The poison, it was not in the decanter. Dr. Hargreaves has confirmed this. The wine poured for the other guests was untouched by cyanide. Thus, the poison was placed directly in the chalice, between the moment it was filled and the moment it touched his lips. Japp scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing. "That's a tight window, Poirot." Thomas Wren filled the chalice just before the first course, and the toast was, what, 10 minutes later? 15 at most. Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. 10 minutes, Inspector, is a lifetime in the hands of a murderer. But let us be precise. He consulted his notebook, where he had recorded the sequence of events based on witness accounts and his own observations. The evening had begun with the guests mingling in the drawing room, a glittering hour of champagne and conversation from 6 to 7 o'clock. At 7, they had moved to the dining hall, where the chalice, polished to a gleam by Thomas Wren, sat prominently at Lord Ashburn's place. Thomas had filled it with wine from the shared decanter at approximately 10 minutes to 7, just before the guests were seated. The first course, consomme, was served promptly, and the toast followed at 7:15, as confirmed by the butler's meticulous timing. Lord Ashburn had collapsed within seconds, the cyanide acting with ruthless speed. "The window," Poirot said, pacing the length of the table, "is between 6:50, when the chalice was filled, and 7:15, when the toast was made. But we must narrow it further." He paused by the sideboard, where the decanter and glasses had been stationed. "Thomas Wren, he tells us he stepped away briefly to fetch napkins from the pantry. This was, perhaps, at 6:55, leaving the chalice unattended for a minute or two. A moment of chaos, with guests milling about, servants distracted, and eyes turned elsewhere. Hastings, following Poirot's movements, frowned. "A minute or two, that's cutting it fine, Poirot. Whoever did it had to be quick and bold." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Boldness, mon ami, is the hallmark of this crime. The poisoner chose the chalice, knowing it was Ashburn's alone. They acted in a crowd where a single gesture could go unnoticed. But boldness requires precision, and precision requires planning." Poirot turned to Japp, who was examining the sideboard, his fingers tracing the edge where the chalice had stood. "No spills, no smudges," Japp said. "The servants swear the table was clean when they set it. If someone slipped the cyanide in, they didn't leave a trace." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. Cyanide, in its crystalline form, could be carried in a small vial or packet, easily concealed in a pocket or glove. A deft hand could drop it into the chalice in seconds, dissolving it in the wine without a ripple. But who had such a hand and the nerve to use it? He requested the guest list, which Japp produced from his pocket, a crumpled sheet marked with notes. 30 names, each a potential suspect, but Poirot's focus remained on 3. Lady Beatrice Langley, whose grudge was a fire that burned bright; Sir Charles Vane, whose charm masked a shadowed past; and Thomas Wren, whose fear hinted at a role he dared not confess. "We must map their movements," Poirot said, spreading the list on the table. Each guest, each servant, where they stood, what they saw, what they did not see. Japp's men had already begun this task, and a footman, Peter, was summoned. To recount his observations, "It was a madhouse, sir," Peter said, his lanky frame shifting nervously. "Guests everywhere, talking, laughing. I was busy with the glasses, didn't see much else." He confirmed Lady Beatrice's presence near the sideboard. A.S. Elsie, the maid, had noted, and Sir Charles's wandering through the crowd, though not specifically by the chalice. Thomas Wren, he said, had been in and out, his duties pulling him between the kitchen and the hall. Poirot's pencil moved swiftly, marking positions on a rough sketch of the dining hall. Lady Beatrice, near the sideboard at 6:50, could have acted in Thomas's absence. Sir Charles, drifting through the crowd, had no fixed alibi, his claim of admiring a portrait unverified. Thomas himself, though responsible for the chalice, swore he had only poured the wine. The poisoner, Poirot murmured, chose a moment when attention was scattered, like leaves in the wind. But the leaves, they fall in patterns. He turned to the mechanics of the poison itself. Dr. Hargreaves, summoned to the study, provided further details. "Cyanide is deadly in small doses," he said, his lean face grave. "A few grains, dissolved in liquid, would kill within seconds. No odor, no taste, not in wine, at least. Whoever used it knew what they were doing." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And where might one obtain such a substance?" Dr. Hargreaves hesitated. "It's not common, but not impossible. Industrial uses photography, mining ore, through less savory channels. A chemist, perhaps, or someone with connections." Poirot's thoughts turned to Sir Charles Vane, whose diplomatic travels might have granted access to such channels, and Lady Beatrice, whose wealth could buy silence from those who dealt in poisons. Thomas Wren, poor and desperate, seemed less likely to have the means, but his role as a servant gave him unmatched access to the chalice. "The mechanics," Poirot said to Japp, "are simple in execution, complex in design." The poisoner needed knowledge, opportunity, and a heart cold, enough to act in a crowd. Hastings, pacing restlessly, broke in. "But why the chalice, Poirot? Why not slip it into his food or his drink earlier? It's so theatrical." Poirot's smile was serene. "Theatrical, oui, and that is the point. The chalice was a statement, a symbol of Ashburn's power. To poison it was to strike at his heart, his legacy. This is a crime of passion, Hastings, but passion guided by a calculating mind." As evening approached, Poirot requested a moment alone in the dining hall. Standing where Lord Ashburn had stood, envisioning the fatal toast, the room, now silent, seemed to whisper its secrets, the clink of glasses, the rustle of silk, the fleeting glance of a killer. "You saw it all," Poirot said softly, addressing the absent chalice, "and you will tell me who." He closed his notebook, his resolve unshaken. The mechanics of murder were clear, but the hand that set them in motion remained hidden, a shadow among shadows, waiting for Poirot's little grey cells to bring it into the light. Chapter 7. A web of lies. The evening shadows stretched long across Greystone Manor, cloaking the grand halls in a sombre twilight that seemed to mirror the tangled web of deceit Hercule Poirot sought to unravel. The study where he now sat was a fortress of quiet, its heavy curtains drawn against the encroaching dusk. The only sound, the soft ticking of a grandfather clock. Poirot's notebook lay open before him, its pages filled with precise annotations, each a thread in the intricate tapestry of Lord Ashburn's murder. Captain Hastings, perched on the edge of a leather armchair, fidgeted with his cufflinks, his patience wearing thin. "It's a maze, Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "Everyone's got a story, and half of them don't hold water. How do you sort the truth from the lies?" Poirot's eyes, sharp as a falcon's, gleamed with quiet intensity. "The lies, mon ami, are as revealing as the truth. Each falsehood is a brushstroke, painting the portrait of the guilty." He leaned back, his fingers steepled, his mind a crucible where facts and suspicions fused into clarity. Inspector Japp, who had joined them after a day of relentless interviews, slumped into a chair, his notebook dog-eared and smudged. "We've talked to every guest and servant," Japp said, rubbing his temples. "And what have we got? A pack of alibis, each shakier than the last. It's enough to drive a man to drink." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. "Patience, Inspector. The web of lies, it is delicate but not unbreakable. We shall pluck each strand and see where it leads." He had spent the day cross-referencing the statements of the 30 guests and the manor staff, focusing on the critical hour before the fatal toast. The chalice, poisoned with cyanide, had been the sole target, its silver gleam a beacon. For a calculated killer, the question was not only who had the opportunity, but who had woven their lies to conceal it. Poirot turned to his timeline, a meticulous record of movements during the mingling from 6 to 7 o'clock. Lady Beatrice Langley had claimed to be in the conservatory, seeking solitude, yet Elsie, the maid, placed her near the sideboard at 6:50, close to the chalice. Sir Charles Vane, with his polished charm, insisted he was admiring a portrait, but no one could confirm his presence by the dining hall's west wall. Thomas Wren, the nervous servant, swore he had only stepped away for a moment to fetch napkins, yet Peter, the footman, recalled him lingering in the pantry longer than necessary. "Each lie," Poirot said, tapping his pencil against the page, "is a thread that connects to another. We must follow them to their source." Japp, flipping through his notes, grunted. "Lady Beatrice is the worst of the lot. Says she was in the conservatory, but Elsie's certain she saw her by the table. Why lie if she's got nothing to hide?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "She lies, perhaps, to protect her pride or something more. Her feud with Ashburn is a fire that burns deep, but poison is a subtle weapon, and Lady Beatrice, she is not subtle." He recalled her icy composure. In the library, her denial of murder laced with a defiance that bordered on disdain. Yet the tremor in her hands, the fleeting hesitation in her voice, suggested a secret she guarded closely. Hastings, pacing now, stopped short. "What about Vane? That fellow's too smooth by half. Says he was by the portrait, but Peter didn't. See him there, and that letter Japp found coded, no less. Sounds like a man with something to hide." Poirot nodded, his mind returning to the cryptic letter in Sir Charles's luggage. its numbers and initials hinting at a financial dispute tied to Ashburn. Sir Charles, he mused, is a man of shadows. His charm is a mask, and behind it lies a motive we have yet to fully uncover. But a man who deals in ciphers does not act on impulse. Japp leaned forward, his voice low. And then there's young Thomas. Boy's scared out of his wits, says he was only gone a minute, but Peter swears it was longer. Could be he's covering for someone, or he's in deeper than he lets on. Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on the desk, a rhythm of thought. Thomas Wren is a pawn, Inspector, but pawns can be moved by a clever hand. His fear is not that of a mastermind, but of one who knows too much or fears he does. Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, and requested the presence of Elsie the maid once more. The girl, her apron wrinkled from nervous twisting, entered with downcast eyes. "Miss Elsie," Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm, "you saw Lady Beatrice near the sideboard. Can you recall the exact moment, and who else was near?" Elsie bit her lip, her voice trembling. "It was just before we sat down, sir, around 10 to 7. Lady Beatrice was by the table, looking at the silver, I thought. I didn't see her touch the chalice, but there were others nearby. Sir Charles, he was passing through, and Mr. Wren, he'd just come back from the pantry." Poirot's eyes gleamed, the pieces of the puzzle shifting in his mind. "And Thomas, he was at the sideboard when you saw Lady Beatrice?" Elsie nodded. "Yes, sir, but he was busy with the glasses. Didn't seem to notice her." Poirot thanked her, dismissing her with a kind smile, but his thoughts were racing. The convergence of Lady Beatrice, Sir Charles, and Thomas near the sideboard at 6:50 was no coincidence. It was a moment of opportunity, a fleeting chance for a poisoner to act. He turned to Japp. "We must speak again with Peter, the footman. His memory of Thomas's absence may hold the key." Peter, summoned from his duties, was a lanky youth with a habit of shifting from foot to foot. "I told you, sir," he said, addressing Japp, but glancing at Poirot. "Thomas went to the pantry for napkins, but he was gone longer than a minute, maybe 5. I saw him come back just as the guests were settling down." Poirot's pencil paused over his notebook. 5 minutes, you say? And during this time, who was near the chalice?" Peter frowned, thinking hard. "It's hard to say, sir. The room was full, people moving about. I saw Lady Beatrice by the table, and Sir Charles was nearby, talking to someone, can't recall who. But I wasn't watching the chalice every second." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the gaps in the footman's account. 5 minutes was a lifetime in a crowded room. Enough for a deft hand to slip cyanide into the chalice while attention was elsewhere. Returning to the study, Poirot spread out his sketch of the dining hall, marking the positions of Lady Beatrice, Sir Charles, and Thomas at 6:50. The sideboard, where the chalice stood, was a focal point, surrounded by a swirl of guests. "And servants, the web," Poirot said, his voice low, "is woven tightly here. Lady Beatrice lies about her whereabouts, Sir Charles obscures his movements, and Thomas conceals the length of his absence. Each lie protects another, but whose hand held the poison? Hastings, his frustration mounting, threw up his hands. It's like chasing shadows, Poirot. They all had the chance, and they're all lying about something. Could they be in it together?" Poirot's eyes widened, a spark of revelation igniting. Together, Hastings. A conspiracy, perhaps, but not of equals. One leads, the other's follower are led without knowing. The lies, They form a pattern, and the pattern points to a single truth. Japp, sensing Poirot's shift in focus, leaned in. "You're onto something, aren't you? Care to let us in on it?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Not yet, Inspector. The web is fragile, and we must not break it before we see its design. But I suspect the poisoner used the lies of others as a shield, a distraction to mask their act." He closed his notebook, his resolve firm. "We shall question them again, and we shall watch their eyes. The truth, it hides in the flicker of a glance, the pause before a word." As the clock struck 8, its chimes echoing through the study, Poirot stood, his posture as erect as ever. The web of lies was intricate, but not impenetrable. Lady Beatrice's pride, Sir Charles's secrets, Thomas's fearage was a strand, and somewhere at the centre lay the spider who had spun it. "The little grey cells," Poirot said softly, "they are weaving their own web, and soon the guilty will be caught." Chapter 8. The bribe uncovered. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Greystone Manor, shrouding the ancient oaks and manicured lawns in a veil of secrecy that matched the atmosphere within its walls. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat buttoned against the damp chill, stood in the servants' courtyard, a narrow space behind the kitchen where deliveries arrived and gossip flourished. His polished shoes, slightly muddied from the cobblestones, betrayed his venture into this utilitarian corner of the estate, a far cry from the gilded halls above. Captain Hastings, bundled in a tweed coat, stood beside him, his breath visible in the crisp air. "Hardly the place for your little grey cells, Poirot," he remarked, eyeing the crates of vegetables stacked against the wall. "What are we doing out here?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with purpose, his moustache impeccably groomed despite the early hour. "The truth, mon ami, it hides in the corners where eyes seldom linger, and today we seek it in the possessions of young Thomas Wren." He had arranged, with Inspector Japp's reluctant approval, to examine the servant's belongings, prompted by the lad's nervous demeanour and the discrepancies in his account of the fatal evening. The courtyard, bustling with morning deliveries, offered a discreet vantage point to observe the servants' comings and goings, and Poirot's instincts told him that Thomas's fear held the key to a deeper truth. Japp joined them, his face flushed from a brisk walk across the estate. "I've got a constable watching the boy," he said, his voice low. "He's been skittish as a colt, but he hasn't tried to bolt." "What are you after, Poirot? Think he's hiding something?" Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. "I think, Inspector, that Thomas Wren is a leaf trembling in the wind, but the wind, it is blown by another. Let us see what his possessions reveal." They entered the servants' quarters through a side door, a cramped passage leading to a dormitory where the male staff slept. Thomas's cot, tucked in a corner, was as Spartan as expected. A thin mattress, a folded blanket, and a small wooden box for personal effects. Poirot, with a nod to Japp, opened the box, his gloved hands moving with the precision of a watchmaker. Inside were a few coins, a worn photograph of an elderly woman, presumably Thomas's mother, and a bundle of letters tied with string. But it was a small, sealed envelope tucked beneath a folded shirt that caught Poirot's eye. He lifted it carefully, noting its weight. "This, messieurs, is not the letter of a poor servant," he said, breaking the seal with a deft flick. Inside was a crisp banknote £50, a fortune for a lad like Thomas, and a brief, unsigned note. "Ensure the sideboard is clear at 10 to 7. No questions." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. "A bribe," he murmured, holding the note to the light, and one that confirms our suspicions. Hastings, peering over his shoulder, let out a low whistle. £50. That's enough to buy a man's silence or his soul. Who's it from, Poirot? Jap, his jaws set. Took the note and examined it. No signature, no watermark. Could be anyone with deep pockets. But why Thomas? He's just a servant. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Just a servant, Inspector, but one with access to the chalice. He was paid to act or to look away. They summoned Thomas, who entered the dormitory with the air of a man walking to the gallows. His sandy hair was dishevelled, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Sir," he stammered, seeing the envelope in Poirot's hand, I can explain." Poirot's voice was gentle but unyielding. "Explain then, mon garçon. This money, this note, they tell a story, but I wish to hear it from your lips." Thomas collapsed onto the cot, his hands trembling. "I didn't know it was for murder. Sir, I swear it." His voice broke and tears welled in his eyes. "A lady gave me the money 2 days before the banquet. She said it was for a prank, to clear the sideboard at 10 to 7, make sure no one was watching. I needed it, sir, for my mother's medicine, her debts. I didn't think it would hurt anyone." Poirot's gaze was steady, his tone calm but piercing. "This lady, Thomas, who was she?" Thomas's lips quivered, his fear palpable. "It was Lady Beatrice Langley, sir. She came to me in the garden, said it was a jest to embarrass his lordship. I didn't know about the poison, I swear." His words spilled out, a torrent of guilt and desperation. Poirot exchanged a glance with Jap, whose face hardened. "Lady Beatrice, eh?" Jap said. "That puts a new spin on things." Poirot dismissed Thomas with a nod, instructing Jap to keep him under watch. As the boy fled, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The bribe, it is a thread that ties Lady Beatrice to the crime, but not to the poison itself. She insured the chalice. Was unguarded, but did she know what would follow?" Hastings frowned, his mind struggling to keep pace. "You mean she might not be the killer? But why bribe Thomas, if not to set up the murder?" Poirot paced the narrow room, his steps measured, his thoughts a whirlwind. Lady Beatrice's grudge is real, her motive clear, but her methodite lacks the subtlety of cyanide. She is a woman of confrontation, not stealth. The bribe, it was a distraction, a means to clear the stage for another. He paused, his eyes gleaming. "We must confront her, but with care. The web is tightening, and she is not its only spider." They found Lady Beatrice in the conservatory, a glass-domed haven filled with exotic ferns and the scent of damp earth. She stood by a potted orchid, her crimson shawl a vivid splash against the greenery, her posture as regal as ever. Poirot approached with a courteous bow, his expression unreadable. "Madame," he said, "we must speak of a matter most grave. A sum of money, £50, was found in Thomas Wren's possession, with a note bearing your intent." Lady Beatrice's eyes flashed, but her voice remained steady. "Money, a note. I know nothing of this, Monsieur Poirot." Yet her hands, clasped tightly, betrayed a flicker of unease. Poirot held up the note, its words stark in the conservatory's soft light. "This, madame, instructs Thomas to clear the sideboard at 10 to 7. A curious request for a prank, as you called it." Her lips parted, then closed, her composure fraying. I meant only to unsettle Reginald," she said at last. "A jest, to spill his wine, make him look the fool. I paid the boy to ensure the moment was right. I had no thought of poison." Poirot's gaze was relentless, his voice soft but probing. And yet, Madame, the chalice was poisoned in that moment you arranged. A coincidence, perhaps. Lady Beatrice's face paled, but she drew herself up, her pride a shield. I am no murderer, Monsieur Poirot. I despised Reginald, yes, but I would not stoop to such a cowardly act. Her words carried conviction, but Poirot noted the tremor. In her voice, the shadow of doubt in her eyes. He thanked her and withdrew, leaving her among the ferns, her silhouette a study in defiance and fear. Outside, Hastings shook his head. She's in it up to her neck, Poirot. Bribing the boy, lying about the conservatory, why, it's practically a confession. Poirot's smile was serene. A confession of intent, perhaps, but not of murder. Lady Beatrice created the opportunity, but the hand that placed the cyanide belongs to another. Jap, waiting in the courtyard, was skeptical. Another. You're saying she set it up, but didn't do the deed? That's a stretch, Poirot. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Not a stretch, Inspector, but a design. The bribe is a piece of the puzzle, but the picture is not yet complete. We must look to Sir Charles Vane, whose secrets are deeper than Lady Beatrice's pride. He tucked the note into his pocket, his mind already turning to the diplomat's cryptic letter and evasive charm. As the mist thickened around Greystone Manor, Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, weaving the threads of bribe, lie, and motive into a pattern that grew clearer with each revelation. The bribe uncovered was a step toward the truth, but the murderer's hand remained hidden, waiting for Poirot to shine his light into the darkest corners of the web. Chapter 9. The Hidden Hand. The twilight that settled over Greystone Manor carried a chill that seeped into the bones, as if the estate itself mourned the treachery within its walls. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat a shield against the damp evening. Eyre stood in the Manor's portrait gallery, a long, dimly lit corridor lined with stern-faced Ashburn ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow his every move. The gallery, with its polished parquet floor and heavy gilt frames, was a place of history and secrets, and Poirot had chosen it for its solitude, a space to let his little grey cells weave the threads of the case into a coherent pattern. Captain Hastings, ever loyal, stood nearby, his hands thrust into his pockets, his expression a mix of impatience and awe. "You've got that look, Poirot," he said, his voice echoing softly in the vast space. "Like you're about to pull a rabbit out of a hat. What's brewing in that head of yours?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile betraying his focus. "Not a rabbit, mon ami, but a spider, the one who spins the web of this crime. We have the bribe, the lies, the motives, but the hand that delivered the poison, it remains hidden." He paused before a portrait of Lord Ashburn's grandfather, a severe figure in a powdered wig, and tilted his head as if seeking counsel from the past. Inspector Japp, who had joined them after a day of combing through witness statements, rubbed his eyes wearily. "We're close, Poirot, I can feel it. That note to Thomas Wren points to Lady Beatrice, but you're not convinced she's the killer, are you?" "Nan," Inspector Poirot replied, his voice low and precise. "Lady Beatrice, she is a flame, burning bright with her grudge, but the poison it is a shadow's weapon. The hidden hand, it belongs to one who moves unseen, using the distractions of others." His thoughts returned to Sir Charles Vane, the charming diplomat whose polished exterior concealed a labyrinth of secrets. The coded letter found in his luggage, the unverified alibi, the whispered rumours of a financial ruin tied to Ashburnhall pointed to a man with motive and means. Yet the proof remained elusive. Poirot led the way back to the study, where a Fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows on the oak-panelled walls. He spread his notebook on the desk, its pages a testament to his methodical mind, each entry a step toward the truth. The timeline of the fatal evening was now a detailed map. Thomas Wren filling the chalice at 6:50, his brief absence to the pantry, Lady Beatrice's presence near the sideboard, Sir Charles's unconfirmed wanderings. The bribe £50 and a note from Lady Beatrice had ensured the chalice was unguarded, but the cyanide's precision suggested a colder, more calculating mind. Sir Charles Vane Poirot said, tapping the page where the diplomat's name was circled. He is the shadow in our puzzle. His charm is a veil, his movements a mystery. We must uncover what lies beneath. Jap nodded, producing the coded letter from his pocket. I had a go at this with one of my lads who fancies himself a code breaker, he said. Couldn't crack it fully, but it mentions a deal. A gets the profit, V takes the loss. If A is Ashburn and V is Vane, that's a motive as old as time. Poirot studied the letter, its cryptic numbers and initials a puzzle within a puzzle. A financial wound, he murmured, and wounds fester into vengeance. Sir Charles, with his travels and connections, could procure cyanide. A diplomat's world is not without its darker corners. He recalled Dr. Hargreaves's words. Cyanide was accessible to those with the right contacts, and Vane's diplomatic postings in the East, where such substances were used in industry, made him a plausible candidate. Hastings, pacing by the fire, stopped short. But how did he do it, Poirot? The dining hall was packed, and Thomas was back at the sideboard by 10 to 7. Vane would have needed nerves of steel to slip the poison in. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind reconstructing the scene. Nerves, mon ami, and opportunity. Lady Beatrice's bribe created the moment Thomas's absence, the crowd's distraction. Sir Charles, he moves like a cat, unnoticed in the chaos. A flick of the wrist, a grain of cyanide in the chalice, and the deed is done. To test this theory, Poirot requested a reenactment of the mingling hour, gathering the servants and a few cooperative guests in the dining hall. The room, though cleared of its tragic aftermath, still carried an air of unease, its chandeliers casting a cold light over the empty table. Poirot positioned a footman to stand in for Thomas at the sideboard, while he himself played the role of Sir Charles, moving through an imagined crowd. Here, he said, pausing near the sideboard, the chalice stands, unguarded. The guests are talking, laughing, their eyes elsewhere. A man like Vane, with his grace, could approach, drop the poison, and retreat in a moment. Jap, watching closely, nodded. It's possible, but we need more than theory. If Vane's our man, we need proof. Poirot agreed, his mind turning to the letter. He summoned a local scholar, Mr. Grayson, who had a reputation for deciphering codes, to examine the document. Grayson, a bespectacled man with a nervous tic, arrived within the hour, his satchel brimming with reference books. After an hour of scribbling, he looked up, his face alight with discovery. It's a substitution cipher, he said, and it confirms a deal gone sour. A is almost certainly Ashburn, and V is Vane. The numbers indicate dates, and some Ashburn profited handsomely, while Vane lost nearly everything. Poirot's heart quickened, though his expression remained serene. A motive, then, as clear as crystal. Sir Charles, ruined by Ashburn's greed, seeks revenge. But the puzzle was not yet complete. The letter proved intent, but not action. Poirot needed to place Vane at the chalice, to connect the coded grudge to the poisoned silver. He requested a second interview with Sir Charles, arranging it in the drawing room, where the diplomat's charm would face the detective's relentless scrutiny. Sir Charles entered, his smile as polished as ever, but Poirot noted a new wariness in his eyes. "Monsieur Vane," Poirot began, his voice soft but unyielding, "we have uncovered a letter, a cipher that speaks of loss and betrayal. Your loss at the hands of Lord Ashburn. Will you deny it?" Sir Charles's smile faltered, his fingers tightening on the arm of his chair. "I deny nothing, Monsieur Poirot. Yes, Ashburn's deal cost me dearly, but I am not a man to hold grudges. I had no part in his death." Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "And yet, monsieur, you were near the chalice, unaccounted for during the critical moment." Lady Beatrice ensured the sideboard was clear. Thomas was absented uses. That moment, Sir Charles's face hardened, his charm giving way to defiance. "You accuse me without proof, Monsieur Poirot. I admired a portrait, nothing more." But his voice, for the first time, carried a tremor. A crack in his polished armour. Poirot dismissed him, his mind alight with possibilities. The hidden hand was emerging, its outline clearer with each revelation. Lady Beatrice's bribe had set the stage. Thomas's absence had opened the door, but Sir Charles, with his motive and opportunity, was the one who stepped through. "The spider," Poirot murmured to Hastings, "is beginning to show himself. But we must be certain, for a spider caught too soon may slip the net." As night fell, Poirot stood alone in the portrait gallery. The ancestor's eyes, a silent jury. The hidden hand was close, its fingers brushing the edges of his grasp. One more push, one more revelation, and the truth would stand revealed, as clear as the emeralds on the poisoned chalice. Chapter 10. The final confrontation. The grand dining hall of Greystone Manor, stripped of its festive trappings, stood solemn under the weight of impending revelation. The chandeliers, dimmed to a soft glow, cast long shadows across the mahogany table, where the silver chalice, now sealed in a police evidence, begrested at its head, a mute witness to the crime. Hercule Poirot, his compact figure radiating an almost palpable intensity, had gathered the guests and key servants in this very room, their faces a gallery of apprehension and curiosity. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of silk or the creak of a chair. Captain Hastings, seated near Poirot, whispered, "This is it, isn't it, Poirot? You've got the whole puzzle solved." Poirot's eyes twinkled, but his voice was grave. "Oui, mon ami. The pieces, they are in place. Now, we unveil the picture." Inspector Japp stood by the door, his arms crossed, his weathered face set in a mask of professional skepticism. The 30 guests, their evening attire a stark contrast to the grim purpose of the gathering, included Lady Beatrice Langley, her crimson shawl a defiant splash of colour, Sir Charles Vane, his charm tempered by a wary tension, and Thomas Wren, the young servant, whose pale face and trembling hands betrayed his dread. Poirot, standing at the head of the table, raised a hand for silence, his presence commanding despite his diminutive stature. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and measured, "we are here to unmask the murderer of Lord Reginald Ashburn, a crime as bold as it was cruel. The chalice, this symbol of his legacy, was turned against him, poisoned with cyanide in a moment of calculated deceit." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, meeting each pair of eyes with a scrutiny. that seemed to pierce the soul. But the truth, it cannot hide forever. The little grey cells, they have worked, and now they speak. Poirot stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back, his tone deliberate. Let us reconstruct the evening. At 6:50, Thomas Wren filled a chalice with wine from a decanter, untainted, as Dr. Hargreaves has confirmed. Thomas then left for the pantry, a brief absence orchestrated by a bribe £50 and a note from Lady Beatrice Langley. A murmur rippled through the room, and Lady Beatrice's face tightened, her lips parting in protest. Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. Madame, you admitted to this bribe, claiming it was a prank to embarrass Lord Ashburn. But your presence near the sideboard, seen by Elsie the maid, tells another story. He turned to Thomas, who shrank. Under his gaze, Thomas Wren, you were a pawn, paid to ensure the sideboard was clear at 7:10. Your fear, it is not of guilt, but of complicity in a scheme you did not fully understand. You left the chalice unguarded, and in that moment, the poisoner struck. Thomas's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded, his voice a whisper. I didn't know, sir. I swear it. Poirot's attention shifted to Sir Charles Vane, who sat with an air of studied calm, his fingers lightly drumming on the table. Monsieur Vane, Poirot said, his voice soft but unyielding, you are a man of charm, of secrets, a letter. In your possession, a cipher speaks of a financial ruin at the hands of Lord Ashburn, a deal that enriched him and left you destitute. A motive, monsieur, as old as betrayal itself. Sir Charles's smile was thin, his eyes cold. You weave a fine tale, Monsieur Poirot, but you lack proof. I was near a portrait, not the chalice. Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his quiet triumph. The portrait, monsieur, no one saw you there. But Peter, the footman, places you near the sideboard, moving through the crowd with the grace of a man who knows how to go unseen. Lady Beatrice's bribe created the chaos, Thomas's absence the opportunity, and you, Sir Charles, you seized it. A grain of cyanide slipped into the chalice in a fleeting moment, dissolved in the wine before Thomas returned. You knew that chalice was Ashburn's alone, a perfect target for your revenge. A gasp rose from the guests, and Sir Charles's face drained of colour. He stood, his chair scraping against the floor, his voice sharp. This is preposterous. You accuse me without evidence, Poirot. I demand proof. Poirot's smile was serene, his eyes unrelenting. Proof, monsieur. It lies in the pattern of your lies. Your alibi unconfirmed, your letter a confession of motive, and your knowledge cyanide, a substance you could procure through your diplomatic travels in the East, where such poisons are known. Poirot turned to the room, his voice rising with conviction. The crime was a symphony, each note played by a different hand. Lady Beatrice, your grudge and your bribe set the stage. Thomas, your absence opened the curtain. But Sir Charles, you were the conductor, directing the poison to its mark. You used the distraction, the crowd, the moment, to strike at the heart of Ashburn's pride. Sir Charles's composure shattered, his hands clenching into fists. You cannot prove this, he shouted, stepping back. But Japp, alert too. The shift signalled to his constables, who moved to block the exits. Poirot continued, his voice calm but inexorable. You thought the chaos would shield you, monsieur, but chaos, it reveals as much as it conceals. The little grey cells, they see the order beneath. Before Sir Charles could protest further, he lunged toward the door, his movements swift but desperate. Jap's men were quicker, seizing him as he reached the threshold. Enough, Vane, Jap barked, his cuffs snapping into place. You're coming with us. The room erupted in whispers, Lady Beatrice's face a mask of shock. Thomas's head bowed in relief. Poirot, unmoved by the commotion, adjusted his cuffs, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. As Sir Charles was led away, still protesting his innocence, Poirot addressed the room one final time. The web of this crime was intricate, but no web can withstand the light of truth. Lady Beatrice, your role was not murder, but you must answer for your part. Thomas, your innocence is clear, but your silence prolonged this tragedy. He paused, his gaze softening. Justice, it is served, but it leaves no one untouched. The guests dispersed, their voices a low hum of disbelief and relief, leaving Poirot with Hastings and Jap. That was a masterstroke, Poirot, Jap said, clapping him on the shoulder. How'd you know it was Vane? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The little grey cells, Inspector. They see the flicker of guilt, the pause of deceit. Sir Charles, he played his part well, but the truth it always betrays. As the manor settled into a restless quiet, Poirot's mind was already turning to the next steps, the formalities of justice that would follow. The final confrontation had unmasked the killer, but the echoes of the crime would linger, a reminder of the fragility, of trust and the power of a single, poisoned moment. Chapter 11. The Confession, the Study of Greystone Manor. Its oak-panelled walls, steeped in the weight of secrets, was a fitting stage for the final unravelling of Lord Reginald Ashburn's murder. The fire in the grate had burned low, casting a faint, flickering light that danced across the room's sombre furnishings. Hercule Poirot sat behind the heavy desk, his notebook closed, his hands folded with a calm that belied the intensity of the moment. Captain Hastings, perched on a leather armchair, leaned forward, his eyes wide with anticipation. "You've done it, Poirot," he said, his voice a mix of awe and relief. "Vane's caught, but will he talk? That's the last piece, isn't it?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a subtle sign of his satisfaction. "Oui, mon ami, the confession, it is the seal upon the truth. And Sir Charles, he will speak, for the weight of guilt is heavier than his charm." Inspector Jap, his tie loosened after the evening's dramatic confrontation, stood by the door, his arms crossed. "We've got him in the library, Poirot," he said, his tone gruff but tinged with respect. "He's still blustering, but he's rattled. Your little show in the dining hall shook him good." Poirot nodded, rising with a grace that seemed to defy the late hour. "Then let us hear his story, Inspector. The hidden hand is revealed, but the heart of the crimate must be laid bare. The library, with its towering shelves and scent of aged paper, was a quieter arena than the dining hall, its atmosphere thick with the gravity of what was to come. Sir Charles Vane sat in a high-backed chair, his wrists bound by Jap's cuffs, his once polished demeanour frayed at the edges. His dark eyes, no longer sparkling with charm, held a mix of defiance and resignation. A constable stood guard by the door, but it was Poirot's presence that dominated the room, his compact figure radiating an authority that needed no badge. "Monsieur Vane," Poirot began, seating himself opposite the diplomat, his voice soft but unyielding, "the game, it is over. The chalice, the cyanide, the motive, they all point to you. Will you deny it still, or will you unburden your soul?" Sir Charles's lips curled in a bitter smile, but his hands trembled slightly, betraying the cracks in his facade. "You're a clever man, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "Cleverer than I expected. But you've no proof, only theories and that damned letter." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his tone as precise as a scalpel. "The letter, monsieur, is a confession in code, speaking of your ruin at Ashburn's hands, a deal that enriched him, while you lost all your fortune, your standing, and the chalice. It was your revenge, was it not?" He leaned forward, his gaze locking with Sir Charles's. Lady Beatrice's bribe cleared the stage. Thomas Wren's absence opened the door, but you slipped the cyanide into the chalice, knowing it would strike at Ashburn's heart, sir. Charles's smile faded, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of Poirot's words pressed upon him. He stared at the floor, his breath uneven, and for a moment the room was silent save for the crackle of the fire. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the last of his resistance, he spoke. "You're right, Poirot. Damn you, you're right." His voice was hollow, stripped of its former polish. "Ashburn ruined me. A mining venture in the East, he promised wealth, but he manipulated the contracts, took the profits, left me with nothing. I was a fool to trust him, and he laughed at my loss." Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind was alert, cataloguing every word. "The cyanide, monsieur? How did you come by it?" Sir Charles's eyes flickered, a shadow of his old cunning returning. "My travels, Poirot, in the East, such things are not so hard to find. A chemist in Bombay, a discreet transaction, it was simple enough. I carried it for months, waiting for the right moment. Ashburn's Banquet, with that ostentatious chalice, was perfect." Hastings, unable to contain himself, leaned forward. "But why poison? Why not confront him, man to man?" Sir Charles's laugh was bitter, almost a snarl. "Confront him, he'd have crushed me again with his wealth, his influence. No, I wanted him to suffer, to choke on his own pride. The chalice was his crown, and I turned it against him." Poirot nodded, his voice calm but relentless. "And Lady Beatrice's bribe, it was a gift, was it not? A moment of chaos you did not plan, but seized." Sir Charles's eyes narrowed, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "You see too much, Poirot." "Yes, I overheard her speaking to the boy in the garden, offering him money to clear the sideboard. I didn't know her reasons, but I saw my chance. When Thomas stepped away, I moved through the crowd, dropped the cyanide in the chalice. It took seconds. No one saw. Jap, his notebook open, scribbled furiously. And Thomas, he wasn't in on it." Sir Charles shook his head. The boy was clueless, just a tool. Beatrice, too, she thought she was playing a prank. I used them both, and they never knew. His voice softened, a trace of regret creeping in. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted justice, my own way." Poirot's gaze was unyielding, his tone tinged with reproach. "Justice, monsieur. Murder is not justice. It is a wound that bleeds all who touch it." He rose, his posture erect, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "You have confessed, Sir Charles, and the law will judge you. Lady Beatrice, she will face her own reckoning for her role, however unwitting. Thomas Wren, he is innocent, but his silence served your purpose." Sir Charles slumped in his chair, the fight gone from him. "Do what you must, Poirot. I'm tired of running." Jap signalled to the constable, who led Sir Charles from the room, his steps heavy, his charm extinguished. As the door closed, Hastings let out a long breath. "That's it, then. You've done it again, Poirot. But how did you know he'd—" Crack. Poirot's smile was serene, his eyes distant. The guilty, mon ami, they carry their truth like a burden. Press them gently, and it falls. Sir Charles, he could not resist the mirror of his own deceit. He adjusted his cuffs, a gesture of order in the wake of chaos. Lady Beatrice, she must be cautioned, and Thomas, he must be freed from his fear. The confession closes the circle, but the scars, they remain. Jap, pocketing his notebook, clapped Poirot on the shoulder. "You're a marvel, Poirot. Scotland Yard could use a dozen of you." Poirot's moustache twitched, a hint of amusement breaking through. "One, Inspector, is sufficient. The little grey cells, they are enough." As the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the library, Poirot stood alone for a moment, his thoughts lingering on the confession. The truth had been revealed, the murderer unmasked, but the cost of such a victory was never light. With a final glance at the empty chair where Sir Charles had sat, Poirot turned to the door, ready to face the final chapter of this tragic tale. Chapter 12. The little grey cells. The moon hung low over Greystone Manor, its silver light filtering through the tall windows of the entrance hall, casting a ghostly glow on the marble floor. Hercule Poirot, his overcoat draped over his arm, stood, poised to depart, his suitcase neatly packed and waiting by the door. The manor, once vibrant with the chatter of guests, now lay quiet, its grandeur tinged with the melancholy of a tragedy resolved. Captain Hastings, his face softened by the relief of a case closed, adjusted his hat and glanced at Poirot. "Another triumph, old chap," he said, his voice warm but subdued. "You've unravelled it, all Vine's plot, Beatrice's folly, Thomas's innocence. I don't know how you do it." Poirot's moustache curved in a modest smile, his eyes gleaming with the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved. "The little grey cells, mon ami," he said, tapping his temple with a gloved finger. "They see what others missed, a flicker of truth in a sea of lies, the order beneath the chaos." He stepped onto the gravel drive where a car awaited, to carry them back to London, the night air crisp and heavy with the scent of autumn leaves. Inspector Japp, emerging from the manor with a final wave to the constable stationed at the door, joined them. "You've outdone yourself, Poirot," he said, his gruff tone softened by admiration. "Vane's locked up, Lady Beatrice is facing charges for conspiracy, and young Thomas is free, though I've given him a stern word about keeping secrets. Scotland Yard owes you one." Poirot inclined his head, his expression serene. "The debt, Inspector, is to justice. I merely provide the mirror to reflect it." As they walked toward the car, Hastings glanced back at the manor, its windows dark save for a few flickering lights. "It's a grim place now," he said. "All that wealth, all that pride, and it ends in poison. Makes you wonder what drives a man like Vane to such lengths." Poirot paused, his gaze following Hastings's to the looming silhouette of Greystone Manor. What drives him, Hastings, is the shadow of greed and the wound of betrayal. Sir Charles, he sought to reclaim his pride, but pride, it is a dangerous. Master Poirot's mind drifted to the case's intricacies, now laid bare like a map unfolded. Sir Charles Vane, driven by the ruin of a failed venture, had seized the opportunity created by Lady Beatrice's bribe to Thomas Wren. The chalice, a symbol of Ashburn's dominance, had been the perfect vessel for his revenge, its emerald and silver a taunt to his lost fortune. Lady Beatrice, blinded by her feud, had unwittingly set the stage, her £50 ensuring the sideboard was clear at the critical moment. Thomas, a pawn in their schemes, had carried the weight of his silence, his fear a testament to his innocence. The web, Poirot said softly, almost to himself, it was spun with care, but no web can withstand the scrutiny of order. He recalled the dining hall confrontation, the moment Sir Charles's defiance had crumbled under the weight of evidence, the coded letter, the unverified alibi, the precise timing of the cyanide's delivery. The confession in the library had sealed it, Vane's words a final thread tying motive to act. Lady Beatrice, though not the killer, would face justice for her role, her pride humbled by the law. Thomas, freed from suspicion, would carry the lesson of his near complicity for life. Hastings, climbing into the car, broke into Poirot's reverie. You always say it's the little grey cells, Poirot, but it's more than that. It's the way you see people, their quirks, their fears. I'd have pinned it on Lady Beatrice from the start. Poirot chuckled, settling into the seat beside him, and that mon ami is why you are the heart and I the mind. You see the fire of passion. I see the shadow it casts. Together we find the truth. As the car pulled away, the manor receded into the night, its secrets exposed, its wounds laid bare. Jap, in the front seat, turned to Poirot. What's next for you, then? Another case, another puzzle. Poirot's eyes twinkled, his voice light but firm. The world, Inspector, it is full of puzzles, and the little grey cells, they are never idle. But for now, a cup of tisane and a moment of repose. Then we shall see what mystery awaits. The car wound through the dark lanes, the moon casting fleeting shadows on the road ahead. Poirot leaned back, his mind already turning to the next challenge, the next tangle of human motives and misdeeds. Greystone Manor, with its poisoned chalice and broken alliances, was a chapter closed. But the book of justice remained open, its pages waiting for the next stroke of Poirot's unparalleled mind.